In 1927, respected philosopher and Professor Bertrand Russell delivered a lecture in South London that was immediately published, hailed as a benchmark on the subject, and later placed into a book that has sold tens of thousands of copies in its over 50 years in print. In 2008, random college senior Russell Johnson read that lecture and didn't like it. Christian Apologetics of Carolina presents Russell versus Russell. In this corner, Bertrand Russell, one of the most noteworthy and renowned philosophers of the 20th century. He is considered to be the father of modern analytic philosophy. And in this corner, Russell Johnson, who has taken 2 or 3 philosophy classes.
Oh, if he's such a good philosopher, how come he's dead?
Bertrand Russell studied for years at some of the finest universities in Europe, most notably Cambridge. Russell Johnson spent the last 3.5 years at UNC Chapel Hill.
Cambridge, 0 national championships. Carolina, 5 national championships. Soon to be 6.
As a professor at Cambridge, Bertrand Russell tutored some of the brightest minds in the world, including Ludwig Wittgenstein, arguably the greatest philosopher of the last century. Russell Johnson spent 4 years as a Sunday school teacher.
Oh yeah, sure it's easy to teach Ludwig Wittgenstein, but you try teaching Kyle.
Last year, Russell Johnson wrote the successful play Blackmail. Bertrand Russell wrote over 40 books and hundreds of academic articles.
Books don't matter if nobody reads them. Look at this. Last checkout, 1958. Whatever.
In middle school, Russell Johnson won a Best Short Story competition. In 1950, Bertrand Russell won the Nobel Prize for Literature.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Good job.
Watch these 2 men's thoughts collide at Russell versus Russell, brought to you by Christian Apologetics of Carolina. Wednesday, Wednesday, Wednesday!
Welcome. I'm glad you're here. It's good to see all of you. You too. Though I should say we have had a little bit of false advertising. I regret to inform you, Bertrand Russell will not be able to join us for the debate today due to some unfortunate complications of his death 30 years ago. Sorry, these things happen. It's show business. You gotta roll the punches. So I'm just gonna use his essay, "Well, I'm Not a Christian," which was originally delivered as a lecture in 1927, and then published in a book in 1957. It was put on the New York Times list of the most influential books of the 20th century, which is a pretty good list to be on. And I recommend reading it. It takes about 15 minutes to read. And it's on the internet because he's dead, so all this stuff is just anybody can put it on the internet. Cool. So that's what I'm going to be debating with. I hope you get the chance to read it if you haven't read it already. I don't think I'm going to depend too much on it, but cool. First and foremost, let's talk about just the overall topic of the evening, and that is just religion in general, and more specifically theology and religion and philosophy and so on and so forth. And what do we mean by Bertrand Russell's position and my own position. And I'm going to answer that the only way I know how, which is with what I like to call the unavoidable questions, the questions that we can't not answer. When I talk about a worldview, I am talking about something comprehensive that it really demonstrates everything that an individual believes. I have this probably best exemplified by these 4 questions. For example, what is my purpose here? Well, what am I doing here? How do I make sense of myself? What ought I to do? An ethical question, what is the right course of action for me? How am I to relate to things outside myself in general? For example, if you put a very high esteem on the environment, that really conditions a lot of what you're going to believe in terms of the way you react to all the things around yourself. Similarly, if you see a very high value in other people and charity, that's going to really work its way out in all of your actions in a way that whether you call religious or philosophical or whatever you call it is extremely important. And finally, what do I know to be true? Sort of the fundamental question of epistemology, I would say is one of the fundamental questions. And they're fundamental, they're central, because we can't not answer them and yet at the same time still walk around and breathe and other things that we like to do on a daily basis. All these questions give us a narrative. They give us a schematic through which we can make sense of our life and prioritize and make decisions. And so you are having answers to these questions automatically, whether you know it or not, just by the fact that you're here. Because by being here, that presupposes there's some value in you being in this room, which presupposes there's some value in being UNC at Chapel Hill and the way you understand things. And it ultimately reduces back to just what the value you see in the purpose for your entire life. And that is a question that I think is a very ethical question, and is a question that I would consider one of the most central beliefs of your worldview. So we've established one thing about these questions, and this is not an exhaustive list, this is just something I threw together, but the questions of this ilk, we presuppose answer these questions in all of our activities. That's one thing that's important. And secondly, they condition the way we view everything. So the answer is that you give to these questions, in terms of like, what ought I do, what do I know to be true, they influence every single other question you could possibly answer. Every single belief you have, every single deed you do is influenced by the way you answer these questions. They're the most central in the webs of your belief, if that's the metaphor you want to talk in. And it's the metaphor I want to talk in. A good analogy for the way that these central beliefs condition all of your beliefs is through a pearl. And I don't know if many of you know a lot about mollusks. I do. I'm sure many of you, come on. But the way that pearls are made is that a small irritant, usually a speck of sand, works its way into a into a clam, and the clam surrounds it with layers and layers over time of calcium carbonate, and the pearl itself takes on the exact shape of the irritant that works its way into a clam. So for example, if you found somewhere a pear-shaped piece of sand, first and foremost, call me, because I want to see it. And secondly, put it in a clam, and then wait a while, and you will get a pear-shaped pearl. This is true. I'm not making this up. I looked it up on Wikipedia. So, bringing that back, I mean, that's a question more of science and less a question of religion. But in terms of just the way that you answer these central questions, will influence the way that your external beliefs, as they're actually manifested in the way that you act and in the way that you talk, and most importantly, in the way that you interpret everything that you run across and see the world, will be conditioned by your worldview, which is exemplified in these questions. And they're essentially religious questions, it's hard to say. Long and short of it, you're thinking, Russell, I don't have a worldview. You're wrong. Everyone has a worldview. I like to think of worldviews as being very much like belly buttons. In that one, as I've stated, everyone has them. And two, they're different. They're all unique. And yet at the same time, we can categorize them in ways that are helpful. For belly buttons, at least in the Western world, it's innies and outies. For worldviews, it's much more complicated. And it gets to something that you can major in. I know a possible objection to that analogy is a lot of people say, well, Russell, what about Adam and Eve? Adam and Eve did not have belly buttons, probably. Does that mean that they didn't have worldviews? It says to you, even if they were the only other person on the earth, would you copulate with someone who does not have a belly button? I wouldn't. Case closed. So everyone has a worldview, and your worldview influences the way you see everything. And you can't get outside it. You can't say, I'm going to leave my worldview with my galoshes at the door because I shan't be needing it today. I don't know why you are polygallightly. Anyhow. And so we need to recognize that you can't get outside your worldview because everything you think, everything you interact with, everything you interpret is conditioned by it. And I think this is where I first interact with Bertrand Russell. And I think it's one of the first misunderstandings that he has, in that he pretends or thinks he is arguing from some sort of phantom Archimedean point completely outside of worldviews. But he has a worldview. I mean, make no mistake about it, he does. I'm calling it the humanist perspective, the humanist worldview. Not necessarily, that doesn't mean that every humanist agrees with Bertrand Russell, though he is pretty highly regarded in humanist circles. If you ever go to humanist circles, you know, for coffee and stuff. But I feel like I can use the term broadly because, one, that's the term that he uses to describe his worldview, and two, just like belly buttons, again, we can categorize in very broad terms. And so Bertrand Russell has a humanist worldview, but he pretends that he doesn't have a worldview, not just on Halloween.